Have you ever struggled to decide whether your story is a romance novel or a women's fiction novel? You're not alone. So many writers start a story thinking that they're writing a romance, and then they come to realize that the real core of the story is not the romance itself, but what happens after. When love changes or it ends, it opens the door to transformation for the main character. And this is where women's fiction actually shines. So if you ask anyone that writes romance, what is a romance novel? What distinguishes it from other types of stories? They will tell you that it is the happily ever after. That at the couples meet, they fall in love, and by the end of the book, they will live happily ever after. And that's the beauty of a romance, right? Because no matter what happens, no matter all their struggles and their fights and all the problems that they have during the course of the novel, we know as readers that by the end, they're going to be in love, that they will have found the perfect person for them, and that they will have learned their lessons and both grown individually, fought off their demons so that they can have a happy life together. But women's fiction really asks a different question. What women's fiction asks is what happens afterwards, right? So once this chapter closes, they've fallen in love, they decide they're going to be together forever. Well, what happens after that? Does it continue, this fairy tale continue forever? Or does the relationship change? And typically for women's fiction, it does, right? The love cools, the love fades, reality takes hold of their life and they have new challenges. So we all know when we get together and fall in love, that's not the end of the story. It continues. So women's fiction looks at the reality of that. What happens to a relationship, to a marriage after they get together, after they get married, after they have children and promise happily ever after? You have a story to tell, but you don't know where to start. Let me show you how to free your story. I teach you how to write and how to dig deep in your soul to release your story and make a difference in the world. So it may sound like I'm saying that women's fiction is a story about failure, but really it's not. It's a story about transformation, and it requires courage and a deep understanding of relationships and writing. Okay, and I'm not sure if you were hearing my cat meow, but he decided that he just absolutely has to have some attention right now. Let's see if he'll go to sleep. Okay, hopefully he will go to sleep so I can continue the video. So where was I? I'm going to start by talking about actually the myth of romance, the myth of the love story, right? So we grow up believing in this myth. Love is this grand prize. That's what we are all aiming for. We're going to find the perfect person and we are going to fall in love. And honestly, this is why I started writing romances to begin with. I love the myth. I love the idea of finding the one person, that one perfect person, right? That soulmate that we all are told that is out there waiting for us. And whether it was true or not, it didn't really matter. I just love the story. So writing romance novels really, really appealed to me. But the problem is that it kind of causes this societal hypnosis that this is going to happen for everyone. And so maybe it's a cultural expectation. I don't know. It actually, though, works in our favor as writers because people already believe in this myth of falling in love and having this fairy tale happily ever after ending. And so as women's fiction authors, we can upend that myth. And we can say that in women's fiction, love isn't the ending. It isn't the end goal, but it's the starting point for self-discovery. And I think that is the draw of women's fiction. It's that we're not all just trying to find the perfect person and then that's the end of the story. It's actually a journey, right? We find the perfect person. Maybe it works out, maybe it doesn't work out, but it's one of the steps in the journey of learning who you are as a woman and achieving all the goals of your life. That's just one of them. So it continues after. So I think also for women that, believe in the fairy tale, but never got it, like they didn't find the perfect person. this wasn't something that is true in their own life, and thanks to countless movies and books like ours, they have come to expect that. And I think what the women's fiction stories do is that they say, well, that's just one story. There is an alternative. There is something else aside from the perfect love story. And I think this is one of the great things about women's fiction novels is that it empowers women to look at, themselves as having multiple interests, multiple goals in their life. So how do we write this story then of what seems to be a failure? So if they have found their happily ever after and then afterwards something happens, love fades, they get divorced, something happens, then it seems, how do we not make it seem like a book about failure? And how do we write that? One of the ways that you show that is what would be called the slow fade. And it's hard to write because it's kind of quiet, like nothing terrible happens in the relationship. It just slowly unravels. It slowly, the love fades. And the couple come to realize that what they loved at the very beginning isn't what they love now. Again, that nothing terrible, there was no betrayal, there was nothing huge, but it was slowly over time, they've just kind of fallen out of love. Now, there was a movie a couple of years ago called The Marriage Story. Now, I think there was some kind of betrayal there, but it does a really good job of showing the slow fade, how they started off in love, but through time, they moved in different directions, and they kind of fell out of love. And it's tragic, and there's a horrible fight scene where they're both crying. I mean, obviously, there's still a little love, right? So if you love somebody, there's always a little love there, even if you've grown apart, even if you know that this isn't for you anymore. You still realize that there's a part of you that has loved this person for many years and it's still there, right? So I liked that movie. It was it was a sad movie. It wasn't a movie I'd want to watch again, but it was really well done because it did show how this couple kind of grew apart. And so if you're writing this type of story, what you're really looking at is the decline. So the little details over time as you're telling the story. So it's not any major like declarations of I hate you, I love you, I'm married to, I fell in love with someone else. But it's these little tiny things that you need to put in your story showing how the relationship is deteriorating. Maybe they stop laughing at the little things that they used to laugh about, or they stop talking about things that sharing stories that they used to, about their day or whatever that they used to share at the beginning of the relationship. So you can show it through the dialogue. You can show it through their body language. You can show it through settings. Maybe, one spouse starts to sleep on the couch more often over time, just because, whatever, right? They're watching TV or whatever they're doing. That shows, again, the decline of the relationship until one day they wake up and they're like, well, why am I with this person? I'm not really in love anymore. Okay, a second way to show the decline of the relationship is through miscommunication. Now, I want to say there's a lot of bad stories where authors use miscommunication not in a way that's not the way that I'm suggesting it. So they're using it in a way that's not good. Miscommunication is not conflict. So miscommunication in women's fiction is actually the lack of communication, and it reveals an emotional truth about the relationship. So when people stop talking, when they stop communicating, the relationship starts to die. Communication is the key to living a happy life together. So when people start, basically speaking different languages, one's talking about one thing, one's talking about something different. Little misunderstandings start to pile up. They start to resent each other because it's like, well, you're not really listening to me. You're not really hearing me. You're not really understanding where I'm coming from. You don't really care about, my day. You don't really care about what's important to me. And maybe the person really does care, but there's other reasons why they're not paying attention or why they're not listening. And so these miscommunications start to tear apart the fabric of the relationship. You can show, for example, that maybe one person feels completely lonely, even if the other person is in the same room. So the person that used to be able to tell anything to now feels like a complete stranger. Like no matter what you say, they're not really going to understand you. And that's heartbreaking. And it shows, if you do it right in your story, how painful it is to see how this relationship is really starting to unravel. And it's what draws readers to sympathize with the character and to feel exactly what that character is feeling and to feel that heartbreak. So a good thing to do here, if you want to show that miscommunication or lack of communication is ruining the relationship, it's destroying the love that they have for each other is to not have like a bunch of external conflicts and arguments, because it's not about that. You could focus maybe even more on the internal monologue. What is this character thinking when they try to tell their spouse a story, and the spouse is not listening, is watching TV, is doing something else, when they never used to do that, when they used to pay attention, when they used to drop everything to talk to their spouse. So you could have that internal dialogue where the character maybe remembers a time when it was different. Let your reader hear what your character wants and what they're not getting. So that tension between what's really happening and what they wish was happening creates this very powerful subtext that is, going to keep your reader turning the pages to see what happens next. Okay, another way that you could show, again, the relationship that is unraveling is when just life gets in the way. So it could be something external that interferes with the relationship. So there could be many things, right? There could be money problems. There could be an illness, a problem with, a sick child, anything that you think would put a strain on the relationship and cause them to have the miscommunications, have a lot of the other issues that's coming from this external stress. So this is a really good opportunity, not just for like the drama of what's happening, but also to explore the internal emotions within the characters. So the reason that, romance novels work so well is that they end before any of these problems happen. They chase each other, they fall in love, and then that's it. That's the end of the story. They're happy. And we're not really supposed to think about what comes next, right? But what does come next, and it's life. Life happens, things happen. And if the couple doesn't deal with those issues, or if they haven't resolved all of their internal issues and they can't deal with the life problems, that's when the relationship is going to suffer. So in great relationships, the couple will band together. They will actually become stronger. But if the relationship isn't strong enough, that's where you're going to have some of the problems that's going to cause the rift. And you do want to make sure that you're showing those internal problems that the characters have. So why aren't they dealing well with their money problems or with the, death of a child? Why aren't they dealing well with that? Well, because they still haven't resolved their issues. And you have to show that, otherwise your characters will come across as petty or cruel or, a number of other things. So if a child dies and the people in the relationship start to be cruel or start to be, well, that's, and you're not showing why, again, that's not going to make a very sympathetic character. So make sure that you're using these external pressures that are coming at them as a mirror to look at themselves and look at why are they reacting the way they're reacting. So financial problems could cause them to feel insecure or feel not worthy. A health crisis could make them redefine what love is, right? So what does it require of a person, and are they willing to give that? And so the next thing that you need to ask yourself as a women's fiction author is, are you willing to write about emotions? Because this is what we're dealing with, right? We're dealing with emotions. That's mostly what we're dealing with. When love ends, that's where emotions are going to collide. This is where we're going to have to look at things like grief or guilt or hope, right, for something different or something better. So you don't want to simplify these emotions. You don't want to rush through them. You actually want to dig in there and really explore them. It's the complexity of women's fiction that makes it so appealing to readers. Readers actually want those emotions. You would think, like, why do they want to read about grief? But they do, because it helps them deal with their own. They watch these characters go through these emotional, terrible experiences. Maybe they cry with them, and it becomes a release for them. It becomes a way of saying, well, if she got through it, I could get through my problems, my issues. And you also want to not only explore the negatives, but you also want to explore the positives. So where are the positives? Well, if you have a couple that finds themselves at the end of a relationship of something they thought was going to be the greatest love of their life, they will also have moments where they remember maybe some of the happier times. So yes, they may grieve the end of their dream, but maybe they had a child together, and that's still a huge positive, right? So this is something that they still share and will still share forever. And yes, they may feel guilty that the relationship ended and that the child isn't going to have both parents there with them, but they may also have, again, happy memories, or they may be extremely grateful that this was the result of their love. So we do want to show that our characters are bouncing back, right? So we're not starting with something terrible and ending with something terrible at the end. We're starting kind of down here, things are going bad, and they kind of go bad for a while, but eventually they start to move up and things start to get better. And the characters realize that this wasn't the end of their life, but actually a transformation, something that they learned from, so that they can actually become even stronger. So one, I guess, tip that I can give you here is don't worry about making your characters likable. We want to make sure that we understand why they're reacting the way that they're reacting, but they can be ugly people during, when they're fighting. In that marriage story, like again, that fight scene, if you haven't seen it, just go to YouTube and put the marriage story and put fight scene, and it'll take you to that and watch it. And it's they say terrible things about each other. They seem like, very bitter and cruel, and it's not pretty. So it's not that we want to make our characters likable all the time. We want to just understand why they're feeling a certain way, but feel free to make them real, make them say things that isn't very nice, and maybe they feel bad about that afterwards. But they should be real. They should have qualities that most of us have, and react in ways that real people would the way that real people would react. So the important thing here is that we are reframing our arc, our romance arc, and it's not a failure. In a romance story, the couples are committing to each other, right? And in a women's fiction novel, the protagonist is really committing to herself, to a new life where she takes control of her life. And I think it's an important distinction. And it's not a selfish distinction. It's a transformation that this character has to go through. She looks at things like her mistakes. What was her role in the destruction of the marriage? What are some issues? What are some scars that she takes away from the relationship and that she's willing to work on? So the trauma, the painful memories, all of this serves to create a stronger character in the end. So the failed marriage isn't just about the failed marriage. It is about deeper issues within that character. So it's only a symptom of the larger issues. If your character ends this marriage and thinks it was all his fault, right? Thank God I'm done with that marriage. It was all his fault. Then that's not going to make a very compelling story. At some point, it might have been all his fault. Maybe it was an abusive husband. But how is this character moving forward? What is it that led her to choose this person to begin with if he was completely horrible? Most marriages, it's not that way, right? It's just both of them, something that they weren't able to commit to each other fully, or there were, like I mentioned before, outside forces that they weren't able to deal with. So the reader should believe, yes, it's sad that this marriage ended, but the character now has a new outlook. The character is going to heal, and the character is going to become an even better person. So if she gets married again, or moves on to something else, she will be a new person, a better person. So hopefully by the end of your novel, your heroine is more mature, is healed from whatever trauma she's had, and she's willing and able to create a new future that looks promising. And so where the ending of a romance novel is the happily ever after with someone else, the ending of a women's fiction novel is going to be a different kind of happily ever after. It's more of an emotional growth happily ever after. It's an emotional independence in a way. And it doesn't have to be a grand thing, like in romance. It does tend to be this grand, somebody says something wonderful, and at the end, and I love you, and all of that. And it ends in sort of this cinematic, beautiful picture at the end, right, of the couple together. Where in women's fiction, it's a little more subtle. So it could be a symbolic gesture of some type. It could be maybe a letter that was never sent, and the person finally sends it to, a mother or a sibling or something. Because again, women's fiction novels it's not always about a relationship, right? So it could be like a mother-daughter relationship. It could be sibling relationships. It could be a moment. So this subtle ending could be a moment of acceptance. I accept, my role in the destruction of a marriage. And it is good if you can show this visually in some way. So yeah, we don't need a big cinematic "I love you," and, they're in front of the Eiffel Tower, a little bit like a romance novel, right? But we do want something. So maybe, the last scene of your book is your heroine putting the house up for sale and driving off into the sunset, into her future, because it signifies to the reader that she is moving forward. And or you can end with the next chapter, right? So you could say she finally did end the relationship, she finally did move forward, and you could show the last scene with her in her new place or in her new goal or taking small steps towards her new self, maybe getting her college degree, doing whatever it is that she's going to be doing next. But the reader should know that this character is going to have a bright future. So again, it's not the same happily ever after, but it is, in a way, a happily ever after. It's a glimpse that the character is going to have a good life, because that's what we want, right? We're not reading this a whole novel to see a depressing end of this character's life. We're seeing it to show how she has transformed from this and she's moving forward towards something equally as good as what she's leaving. So am I saying that romance is fairy tale and women's fiction is reality? Not really, because of course the romance doesn't have to be a fairy tale. It's again, it is the myth of the fairy tale, right? Because we've all grown up with it. And it could perfectly go like that. People get married, they have children, they're happy. Yeah, they have struggles, but they end up together. Old rocking chair, right? Does that still happen? I think it does. And I'm not saying that the women's fiction is just that's the reality, because that's always going to be the end of a relationship. No, I'm just saying that there are two different endings. One is the romance, and we don't really see what happens afterwards, but we assume that it is going to be happily ever after, and they are going to live a great life. But the women's fiction, the ones that deal with marriage, not all women's fiction deal with marriage, by the way, right? There are other relationships and other things, but the ones that are about the end of a marriage, it's about the beauty that does come after the happily ever after. What happens after, and the courage to move forward if that happily ever after didn't happen the way that the heroine expected it to. But still having the courage and the strength and the, ability to move forward to something better. All right. So I hope that this shows you a slight difference between romance and women's fiction. Again, when it's focused on the love relationship, there's different types of women's fiction, not just that. But that shows you a distinction between those two types of novels. And I hope that this has been interesting and helped you. And if it has, please like the channel, like the video, subscribe to the channel, and come back next week and see me again.